All right, the last leg. Are we good to go?
Yes, please.
All right. So, what is homosexuality? Right? We figured, wasn't this what the whole talk was about? Well, yes. And we've been building up to this, and hopefully, again, all the pieces will fall into place. What is homosexuality? The contemporary background. We always have to question our terms. There's a principle in the Sharia that one can only judge a thing when it is properly conceived. Al-hukmu ala shay' far'un an tasawwurihi. So if you want to say what something is or isn't, or give a moral judgment or legal, we have to have a conceptualization first of what is it. So when you say homosexuality, what is that? I don't even know what that is. I don't have an Arabic word for it. So what is it? LGBT, again, I put it in quotation marks in the beginning because I'm questioning the category, right? I can't translate that into Islamic terms. So we have to understand what we're talking about. So homosexuality in contemporary parlance, and even the word homosexuality now is old-fashioned and considered offensive by many people, and like the LGBT, who identify as LGBT. I think it's fine. I mean, it's just purely clinical. It's like homosexuality, same sex. That's all it means. But anyway, and I prefer to use it because it's not our term. We don't have a term that is exactly similar to that in classical Islamic terms. I mean, there are neologisms that translate homosexuality in contemporary Arabic, but I think homosexuality is more neutral than LGBT, which carries a lot of political and social baggage, and it's best for Muslims to avoid, using LGBT as a term, especially internally, right? Because it brings a lot of baggage and a lot of assumptions with it that we would need to vet and to be critical of. So homosexuality in contemporary parlance, it usually refers to feelings of romantic and or sexual attraction to members of one's own sex. That's one element of it. Another element, engaging in, on the basis of these feelings, engaging in romantic relationships and or sexual behavior with members of one's own sex. So we saw this before, action or attractions and desires, and then behavior that follows thereupon. And then third, adopting a personal and social identity based on such feelings and or relationships and acts. So these are three things which, again, traditionally for us as Muslims and also in the West have been separate. Your attractions are one thing. You're not a specific category of human beings just because you might feel a particular attraction. Even if you act on it, it's an act you do, not something you are. But in the contemporary paradigm, all of those are fused together, inextricably. You're attracted, you act upon it, and that is who you are. It's the basis of your identity. So we have to be very careful as Muslims not to take on terminology which brings on board with it this inextricability, because we have to keep these separate. Otherwise, Islam makes no sense, and we cannot operationalize our categories of thought or our Sharia categories if we do that. So modern culture, again, it amalgamates these three into one. I am gay, lesbian, queer, right? It's something that I am, not something that I feel, not something that I do. This is, again, very new and culturally specific to the modern West. Homosexual sentiment and behavior is widely attested in past societies, but were never taken as an identity. This is very particular to the current cultural moment, right? And is therefore contingent upon that moment, i.e. it was something that you did, not something that you were. Again, that's a good take-home message, like phrase to remember, right? And then there's the illusion of any meaningful distinction between desires and actions is morally problematic. So eliding means to get rid of, right? When you say, well, just because I have a desire, I can act upon it. Well, if you apply that consistently, you're going to run into a lot of moral problems very quickly, right? So, of course, the mere existence of a desire can never be a moral justification for acting upon it. We need other moral criteria brought to bear on it. For the contemporary post-sexual revolution West, what's the criterion? Consent. As long as you consent, no problem. For us as Muslims, that's never the criteria. Criteria is what, when God and his messenger have decided upon something, it's not for believing man or woman. When God and his messenger have decided on something, to have a choice in the matter, right? That's our criteria. So we look to Revelation to see what God has actually permitted and prohibited of various desires that we might have. And so considering homosexuality a question of identity rather than a question of acts fundamentally alters the conversation. And this is very important because the modern West, right, just assumes that it is a question of identity and insists on treating it and speaking about it and conceptualizing it in that way. And therefore the deck is already stacked against anyone who's coming from a different paradigm, which says, no, I'm talking about specific acts. No, but those acts are core to who I am. So if you don't accept the acts and celebrate them in your mosque and in your community, then you are excluding me as an entire person. You're undermining me. You're excluding, not recognizing my dignity and so forth. So we saw this before, right? Modern Western culture, it separates these things which should be and are by nature together, sex, reproduction, marriage, morality. And it also amalgamates desires, actions, and identities should be separate, and it puts them together. So again, this slide, take a mental picture, keep that in mind. This is really the key to unpacking a lot of this very, complex issues that come up. There's a very good prism to unlock and untangle a lot of those knots. Also, and we talked about this, it incorrectly separates, i.e. sees as free-floating variables, biological sex, gender identity, expression, sexual orientation. We say, no, those should be aligned. Okay, we understand that they might not be, okay, and that's fine. A person's not morally responsible for what they don't have control over, but normatively, yes, they should be aligned, and we're not embarrassed to say that. While drawing a false equivalence between race, gender, and sexual identity or behavior, and throwing, again, race, gender, and sexual LGBT all into one. Again, we talked about why this is problematic.